Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Australian National University. And it's great to see a packed Llewellyn Hall. And we also have hundreds of people watching online from across the country. My name is Brian Schmidt and I'm the Vice Chancellor of the Australian National University. And I am personally very excited to be opening tonight's event. It is an exceptional panel that we have here tonight at the ANU. I'd especially like to thank our friends at the New Zealand High Commission, including Dame Annette King, for the opportunity to co-host this event. It has been a great project to work and collaborate on together. As is tradition, I would like to invite Dr. Auntie Matilda House to stage to welcome us to her country. As she comes out, following the welcome, we will have a Māori cultural performance, which will be a great showcase of our two cultures. So without further ado, please welcome Auntie Matilda to stage, the first Indigenous Australian to open Parliament House with a Welcome to Country in 2008, the first Indigenous Australian to receive an honorary doctorate in this very hall in 2017. Auntie Matilda.
Thank you very, very, very much. A wonderful man. Gorgeous. What can I say? Tonight we're here to celebrate some wonderful, wonderful things that happened to us here in Australia. And in this country that I live in, the Ngambri, Walgaloo. I'd like to say to you, to introduce to you Dame Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Where are you? There she is. Oh, goodness, I knew I wanted that. And of course, the one and only, the Honourable Julie Bishop, ANU Chancellor and former Australian Foreign Minister. And the one that stole my heart, Rena Owen, international award-winning New Zealand actress and screen legend. It's going to get better. Ladies and gentlemen, a girl that I have followed, but not in the swimming pool because I can't swim. Bronte Campbell, Australian dual Olympic gold medalist and world champion. And there's more. I also acknowledge the Vice Chancellor, our friend Brian Schmidt. Dame Annette King, High Commissioner of New Zealand. I think I missed you up there. And of course the Honourable Anika Wells, Minister for Sport of Australia. And our wonderful Laura Tingle. Laura Tingle. And of course, now the New Zealand mob tried to give me a lesson in this, but I think I failed. Manawan, Wāhine. No good? No good, eh? No good, doesn't matter. Long as you can let me come over. It's a Maori expression, which means women of strength, power, and that's what we have here tonight. the power of what a woman can do. I know, because I'm one of them. And I'm surrounded by many of you who day in and day out, you all lead by example. Can you see me up there, ladies? Yeah. Yoo-hoo. Yeah, leadership. That is underpinned by the wisdom that we all have. And we must take care of that wisdom because it's going to come in handy for the generational changes that are coming up in our lives. Compassion, respect, and most importantly, the ability to sit down, have a yarn and listen. Your achievements are our achievements, and our future, I tell you now, is looking good. I wish you all the very best, have a great evening, and I'm going home to bed. Be standing up and be proud, aren't we, darling? Yeah. See you.
I te mana whakatupu, i te pane kiritanga o te Wāhine. Ka huri taku mahara ki ngā mana whenua, ara, ko, ngā tangata, ngā rawau, rawa ko ngā gambi, ka nā koutou te whenua nei i tiaki. Mai te timatanga taino ati ki tēnei rā, tēnei te mihi māhaki kia koutou. Greetings all that have gathered tonight to celebrate the spirit, the excellence of Wāhine, of women. It is indeed my honour to humbly acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Yambi people who have looked after, nurtured and lived on this country for thousands of years. We have been welcomed on by the karanga, by the te reo o te Wāhine, the woman's voice. Her voice is the first voice that we ever hear when traditionally welcomed by Māori. It is followed by tāne, the male. So tonight we welcome you, not to this country, not to this space, but to our will, te ao Māori. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Oh
ki raro.
Ta wahi maro. Ta moana ki runga i a rangi. Ta moana ki runga i a papa. E takoto moini. Patu maro ana te tangata tui tuana te whenua e tui hōnei. E ngā mata e pi kōna ki runga i a mātou hare ngā mate. Hare atu ki te ao honga. Ki te ao kume. Ki puhanga rua. I whanau mai ngā whetu. A koutou, haere mai, I roto I te ao Māori. E ngā wahine toa, e te whaia, e hui ana bishop, ke nā koe, ke a koe Bronte Campbell, ke nā koe toa. E Jacinda, e taika mihi atu I a koe. Nau, I tuara ana ngā whāmare, putangoa, ahi trenia. Nā te ture, I marau, nā tahi, nau I tuara ana, te iwi Māori. Kia koe au ki te whanau e rena. Tēnā koe ngā tō e rewa. Tēnā koe e te taitonga rau. Anei tō whāmere. E koutou anō, tēnā koutou. Manawati. Ke one final item. And this item is the haka. But this specific haka is called Te Kokoma. It was composed by our old people to remind us about Te Tauhou Māori, which we have to acknowledge Jacinda again for ushering in Matariki. This year was the second year we as New Zealand celebrated Matariki, which is now New Zealand's New Year Māori. And this haka was composed many, many years ago to remind us about Te Kokoma. Te kokoma, te kokoma, ko te hautapu, eri naki naka, ona kari ki pakia, tapa reira tapa, tapa kongrua, yana kukoa i ole, hei! Ko te iwi Māori yana urune,
Ti hei mori ora, e nā rangatira mā tēnā koutou. Ti wharaita nui tēnā koe. Ti mana whenua o tēnā rohi Ngunnawal, tēnā koutou. Ti hanga mātei ki ti hanga mātei, hārei, hārei, hārei atu rā. E nā waiwai tapu, e nā mana wāhine, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Can I begin by thanking Auntie Matilda, who will now be home in bed, for her wonderful welcome to country. And in Māori, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and welcome the growing relationship between the Indigenous people of Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. I too would like to acknowledge Professor Branch-Mitt and the staff of ANU who have supported the New Zealand High Commission in holding this event. So a very warm welcome to you all to Mana Wāhine, celebrating the spirit and leadership and excellence of women across politics, the arts, sport and beyond. We're delighted that you could all join us tonight. You know, we're a sellout crowd, and I'm told our tickets sold for nothing faster than Taylor Swift's. We are honoured to have been joined by 4 remarkable women, Dame Jacinda Ardern, the Honourable Julie Bishop, Rena Owen and Bronte Campbell, and you will hear more about them in a moment from the 5th remarkable woman, Laura Tingle. Thank you Te Arangi Nui Māori Culture Group for another outstanding performance and a traditional Māori welcome that's been afforded to you. They have travelled from Sydney to be with us tonight. So, So why mana wāhine? Mana wāhine is a Māori expression which means woman of strength or powerful, of influence and prestige. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have had many mana wāhine over the decades. The woman who won the right to vote in 1893, the first country in the world to do so. The first to have the top three positions of power held by women simultaneously: the Governor-General, the Prime Minister and the Chief Justice. The first woman filmmaker to receive a Palme d'Or. And I know the Australians will like this. The first woman to score over 1,000 test runs in cricket. And the first Māori woman leader, Dame Whina Cooper, at the age of 79, who led a Māori land march protest from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the North Island, Wellington, advocating for Indigenous land and women's rights. And we are fortunate to have Rena Owen with us tonight, who acted the part of Dame Whina in the movie Whina, screened here in Canberra last year. All our panellists tonight are mana wāhine. But there's no time for women to rest. There is still much to be done to reach the point when we don't say women leaders anymore, we just say leaders. We hope that this event amplifies the positive focus on women generated during the FIFA Women's World Cup, co-hosted by Australia and New Zealand. And while New Zealand no longer in the competition, we are going to live vicariously through the Matildas. That is because Australia are our whānau, our family, except when we play each other. And I did think perhaps the Wallabies will be able to reciprocate for the All Blacks when we play in the final. But we are fortunate to have the Minister of Sport with us tonight, the Honourable Annika Wells, who has been living and breathing football, cricket, netball and tennis over most of this year. Please welcome Annika to the stage to say a few words about the tournament.
Hello everyone, it is a privilege to be here in such esteemed company this evening, and thank you to High Commissioner Dame Annette King for inviting me tonight. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people. Together we stand on the shoulders of 1,600 generations of First Nations people, and I look forward to voting yes to recognising First Nations in our Constitution later this year. Now, the art of politics is knowing when to persuade and when to shut up, so I will not keep you from our panel any longer than absolutely necessary. But I'm so thrilled that we've shoehorned a moment in the diary tonight for me to spend this time with you in support of New Zealand in this extraordinary World Cup moment, in support of amplifying women in sport and women of strength. It actually allows me to work through some grievances. Let me fill you in. I was born a dual citizen. My mother and my maternal family come from Takapuna in New Zealand. And after the Section 44 citizenship dramas of the 45th Parliament, I needed to rescind my citizenship of New Zealand in order to run for Parliament here. Now, Claire O'Neill is a close friend of mine, so I'm trusting in the strength of our friendship when I say that dealing with the Department of Home Affairs was not the warmest customer interface that I have experienced. And hello to Mike Pizzullo, Secretary of Home Affairs, whom I've just spotted in the audience. I'll pop it in the suggestion box on my way out. New Zealand, on the other hand, processed my request swiftly, And I'm allowed to do that as a half Kiwi. I had a Kiwi accent when I was learning to speak. They even sent me a cheery letter. I really will stop it. To say that they were sorry to see me go and that I was always welcome to reapply for my citizenship when the moment was right. Truly, the friendliest people on earth. And the day that I received that letter, not a word of a lie, I opened it at lunchtime in my office, just as the TV networks were all crossing live to the press conference of the freshly elected New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announcing that she was pregnant with her first child with her partner Clark. And my gut reaction to that was, have I picked the wrong country? Because I wanted to live in a country that elected a 37-year-old progressive woman as Prime Minister. I wanted to work together for a future where every woman, from the newest migrant to the Prime Minister herself, was doing their best, balancing tricky choices and sleep schedules, but united in hope and in purpose. But I had chosen Australia. So I just had to put my big girl pants on and fight for that future here. And that was 2017, and in 2019 I did successfully run for Parliament here in Australia. I became the member for Lily in the opposition, and then I too gave birth in office to twins. Then Labor successfully ran and won the 22 election. The Prime Minister appointed me Minister for Aged Care, Minister for Sport, Vice President of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Organising Committee and Executive Committee member of the World Anti-Doping Agency. He's a good boss and a big believer that if you want something done, you give it to a busy woman. He even dispatched me to Auckland for the Women's World Cup draw in November as Australia's representative so that the biggest event in women's sport, the third most watched event in the world, would be hosted by female leaders from the two host countries. And it was one of those pinch yourself full circle moments to do that alongside Dame Jacinda Ardern, who joins us shortly here tonight. But I have never forgotten that moment when Donald Trump was the President of the United States, when Scott Morrison seemed invincible here in Australia, and I drew ballast and inspiration from our friends across the ditch and decided to fight with the movement to make that kind of leadership possible here. And that moment drives me to do everything I can with my time in office to create and hold space for women and girls to come through and to lift us all. So I cannot wait to hear from our panellists tonight, and as promised, I'll hand you over to Dame Annette to take us on.
Thank you, Annika, and I know that it's your birthday tomorrow. And the best present you could receive is a win by the Tillies on Saturday. But we just want to wish you an early happy birthday. And now I'd like to welcome the moderator of the panel tonight, Laura Tingle. Laura has reported on Australian politics for more than 40 years and worked at the ABC since 2018. She is the chief political correspondent for the ABC 7:30 program, can't be missed each night. She has written 4 quarterly essays, won 2 Walkie Awards, and is president of the National Press Club of Australia. And in 2023, she joined the board of the ABC as a staff elected member. I'll ask Laura to come up and join us, and she will introduce the panel.
Thanks so much, Dame Annette. Good evening and kia ora to all of you. Thanks, Auntie Matilda, for welcoming us to your country. And I too would like to acknowledge that we are meeting and speaking on the unceded land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I'll add my greetings to the ones Dame Annette has already made to our distinguished guests, but I'm sure that everyone here is very distinguished in their own unique ways. So welcome to you all. It's my great pleasure to be facilitating this conversation with 4 really remarkable women, let's get into it without further ado. Let me introduce you to them. There's a fairly good chance that most of you in this audience have yelled encouragement via the television to our first guest, given that she has not only won 28 international medals in her swimming career, but has done so over 3 Olympics so far: London 2012, Rio in 2016, and Tokyo in 2021. Not content with that, Bronte Campbell has recently returned to the pool and training, aiming for the Paris Olympics next year, to see if she can join the ranks of just 3 other Australian swimmers who have represented the country at 4 consecutive Olympics. But Bronte is not just a champion in an individual sport. At just 22, she found herself catapulted into the world of advocating for and representing her fellow swimmers as president of the Australian Swimmers Association. As leader of Australia's international swimming team, the Dolphins, Bronte has also learnt much about leadership and about team performance. Please join me in welcoming her. Rena Owen will be known to many of you through her extraordinary performance in one of Aotearoa, New Zealand's most iconic films, Once Were Warriors, in which she played matriarch Beth Heckey in a story which both exposed and confronted issues of domestic violence and abuse long before these subjects were generally discussed. But Rena has had a staggering international film, theatre and television career over 35 years, including playing the renowned warrior for Māori rights and particularly Māori women's rights, Whina Cooper. Achieving all these things involved a long journey from the Bay of Islands as one of 9 children, to a job she thought she wanted to do, to the one which best reflected all she was capable of. Please welcome Rena Owen. Our next guest, as Chancellor of the Australian National University, is also our host for the evening. I met Julie Bishop not long after she was elected to the House of Representatives in 1998, and I've watched the ups and downs, but mostly ups, of her career over the next 20 years. She held multiple ministerial portfolios, but not all at the same time. Notably, she was Australia's Foreign Minister for 5 years through some very tumultuous times, and the images of her pursuing and berating those responsible for the downing of MH17 stick firmly in my mind. But a fact that seems even more staggering to me in these unstable political times is that she was not only the first female deputy leader of the Liberal Party, but she held this job for more than a decade, surviving 4 leadership changes. And not only was she a woman, but she was a self-declared moderate in a party where moderates were becoming, and have almost become, an extinct species. Please welcome Julie Bishop. Dame Jacinda Ardern announced she would be standing down as the Prime Minister of Aotearoa, New Zealand in January this year, after leading the country through the trauma of pandemic and the tragedies of the Christchurch terrorist attack and the White Island disaster. But her legacy is so much more than tragedy and disaster. She came to the job as the country's youngest Prime Minister and became only the 2nd woman in the world to have a baby while leading her country. Her particular style of politics earned her a huge international fan base, and certainly a much bigger fan base than the flight of the Concords. Oh, I'm glad you got that joke. I didn't know what you were. Like all politicians, not everything she did was either applauded or successfully delivered, but she leaves the legacy, which includes 50% representation of women in Parliament, decriminalised abortion, improved pay equity laws and extended paid parental leave. Please welcome Dame Jacinda Ardern to the stage. with my gammy leg. I managed to get over there without falling over, so that's a major improvement for the night. Welcome to you all once again. I wanted to start with a question which was prompted by a conversation I had with Rena the other day. We were reflecting on a common experience of our childhoods, which was that for our generation, certainly the options for jobs for women were secretary, nurse or nun. And I think we both, strangely enough, realised that we'd both thought about being nuns for a while. I think great loss to the convent, I think, but at least it would have been quiet, I think. It would be a bit of an advantage, but there we go. But it made me think about the sort of threshold question in a way, which you could summarise as, what did you all want to do when you grew up? Which sounds a little bit naff, except it's so important to understand whether you know what you're going to do. I think people want to know whether, you all knew what you were going to do, you didn't know what you were going to do, you knew what you didn't want to do. And I thought we'd start with Bronte. Partly, this is partly a FIFA-related event, and we thought we'd start with our resident sporting superstar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and I've never seen such a beautiful, engaged audience. It's truly an honour to be here on this panel, and I'm pinching myself that I get to be here with these incredible women who have paved the way for me to tell this part of my story, which is that I grew up in a small country called Malawi in Africa, and I knew I was about to move to Australia, and I watched the 2000 Olympics. And I watched Susie O'Neill win the 200 freestyle, touch the wall, get out of the pool, do an awkward little shuffle dance with the whole stadium roaring, and I thought, that's what I want to be. When I move to Australia, I obviously have to be an Olympic swimmer. That's it. And with the certainty of a 7-year-old, I thought that's just going to be easy. I'll just go and I'll just start training, and then I'll be an Olympic swimmer, and that's how it works. It's not that simple, but it has been how it has turned out in the end, which has been pretty incredible. But the extra point there is that the reason I wanted to do it is because I saw someone else do it, and I feel so fortunate to be born at a time where I got to see someone do that, and I got to see someone who looked like me, someone who I could aspire to. When I was in grade 3, we had a dress-up day at school, and I went as Susie O'Neill and put like some chocolate medal around my neck, which didn't last the whole day. And then in 2012, when I was 17 years old, I qualified for my first Olympic Games, and that was by far, no matter how many other things I achieve, my absolute favorite race. I've won Olympic gold medals, I've won individual world championship medals, I've broken world records, but the feeling of touching the wall and turning around and at Olympic trials, if you come first or second, you qualify for the team. And if you don't, then you've got to try again in another 4 years. I came second by 0.1 of a second. If you blink, that's 0.1 of a second. So that's how close I was to not being on that side of my dream. But turning around and seeing that you fulfilled your childhood dream, that moment is so special to me, and doesn't matter what else I do in the sport. That one moment, that seed of the 7-year-old, then got to be a 17-year-old, and then pinching myself as a 27-year-old still in the sport. Whenever it's not a bad question, it's the best question, because every time I walk up behind the blocks, it's terrifying and your heart is racing. And I always just think about the 7-year-old who was fearless, the 7-year-old who wasn't afraid to dream big, who no one told that was an unlikely thing to happen. The 7-year-old would have been jumping out of her skin to be behind the blocks. So if I step up and I'm afraid, I think about the 7-year-old, and I'm like, she would be stoked. You're still that person. You get to smile and you get to do this, and I feel so privileged that I've been able to make a career of it.
Rena, I mean, did you have somebody to look up to, or did you know what you wanted to do?
First, I'll just say, kia ora koutou, ka nui taku mihi aroha, ki te tangata whenua, and kia koutou katoa. It's like Bronte, it's a privilege to be in this moment with you all, And one thing I'd like to add to Jacinta's list is mātariki. So for a lot of you who, the Kapahaka group talked about mātariki, was we have this new national holiday because of this wāhine, this mana wāhine right here. But very briefly, I've had a big life and it's a big story, so to keep it to the nuts and bolts, I was born an actress. Yeah, my family would go, yes, she was. I was the tangi weto in the family. I cried all the time. I was overly emotional, hypersensitive. I was highly intelligent, and I had the most vivid imagination. And I really was that kid. And my first experience in the entertainment world started in Kapahaka. What we were beautifully presented tonight by the Sydney Māori Club was Kapahaka, and I started at knee-high, learning how to do poi and swing my hips and sing traditional Māori singing and dancing to entertain tourists and dignitaries in the Bay of Islands. And then I was published when I was 8 years old. I won a poetry contest for children under 10 years old. And in high school, Bay of Islands College, principals have the power to change people's lives. My principal changed my life. My principal, I was going from a rebellious teenage era to being kind of suspended from school, and he put me on stage. He said, you better give that young Owen girl, you better audition her. So my first stage role was Bloody Mary in South Pacific. Yes, at the age of 15 going on 60, Bloody Mary in South Pacific, and I did such a good job that I was promoted to the lead role, Calamity Jane, in Calamity Jane. So I knew, which is a gift as a young person, as a rangatahi, that I had found my place in the world. I'd found that spot where I belonged, where I felt I'd fitted in, because I knew I wasn't cut out to sit behind a desk 9 to 5. I just knew it, and I loved telling stories, and I loved making people laugh and cry. However, at the end of the 70s, two things. As a Māori, being an actor was not an option. We had no brown faces. I had no role models growing up. No brown faces on our TVs and films. And the greatest thing that made me so proud of Once We're Warriors 20 years later was that movie in 1994 told all these little brown kids all around the world that they could be actors, that they could be writers and directors and filmmakers, that they could be in the movies, because that was my childhood dream. My mum took me to see Born Free. Yeah, kia ora, Africa, kia ora. Born Free was a movie that came out of Africa, and I remember sitting there as a little kid, and that lion made me cry, and the magic of cinema. So I couldn't be an actor when I left high school. I could be a secretary, a teacher, or a nurse. As a woman, those were my options if you weren't going to be a housewife, which was still quite the norm. And I got accepted into teaching and nursing, and this is the God-honest truth. I started watching a soap opera called Angels from England. It was about doctors and nurses. And I said to my mum, never mind teaching, Mum, I'm going to go and be a nurse and I'm going to meet me a doctor. And I did. I was one of the last classes to be hospital trained at Auckland Hospital. I am a qualified general obstetric nurse. Then as a 21, 22-year-old, I went to do my big OE to London and, well, went a bit AWOL, first taste of freedom, and I ended up going to drama school in the mid-80s. So I had the courage to follow my heart and my passion, and that's what I say to all you young wāhine out there, and young men too, is that's what it takes to be sitting in this privileged position, is having the courage to follow your heart and do what you're born to do and never give up. Kia ora.
Yeah. Dame Jacinda, you grew up in a small town in New Zealand. And your parents, your father was a policeman, your mum worked in the school canteen, very labour-oriented, you handing out flyers from an early age. But what did you What did you think you would be? Did you have a dream of what you would want to be? And was politics part of it?
Laura, when you mentioned that you might ask us what our first career aspiration was, I thought, damn it, do I tell the truth? But this feels like a safe space, so I will. The very first thing I ever remember thinking that I wanted to do when I grew up was while I was at primary school, and I came home one day and declared to my mother and father that I wanted to be a clown. Which is rather ironic because I find them quite terrifying now. But I went through a string of things that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a psychologist. I wanted to be a policewoman. Actually, to be honest, the policewoman was probably the career that I was closest to ever pursuing. There was even a phase where I wanted to be an actress. Second embarrassing confession, I auditioned for Lord of the Rings. To be a hobbit. One day I had the joy of telling Peter Jackson that story. But you know, for all of my love of politics, and as you see, I liked the idea of being involved in politics from a very young age. In fact, I joined the Labour Party at 17, but never because I saw myself as being an MP, but because I saw it as a way of changing the world for the better. And my way of doing that was to deliver flyers and to knock on doors. But I grew up with two females having been Prime Minister in New Zealand. How blessed was I? First Jenny Shipley, and the first Prime Minister I ever voted for was a woman, and it was Helen Clark. I grew up never believing that my gender would stop me from being able to do what I wanted to do. And how lucky was I for that? However, I still believed that whilst it wasn't my gender that would get in the way, I believed it was my character that would. I believed that I was too sensitive for politics, that I lacked the confidence, that I lacked the strength, and from time to time I even believed that I lacked the intellect. And so I never saw front of house as being the place that I would be. And I wish I could stand here and tell you now that over the years I grew that confidence and brought out those traits that I always had deep inside, but I would be lying. There were days that absolutely I questioned myself, even when I was in the job. So now that I'm outside of this career, I feel like I have the freedom now to talk about things that people see as probably being a little on the vulnerable side, to share that I once wanted to be a clown, and to proudly say that you can doubt your character, you can lack confidence, and you can still do the most extraordinary things. Because I had the privilege of doing just that. So I never aspired to be there, but I felt very proud when I was.
So, Julie Bishop, you had an incredibly successful corporate career as a lawyer before you even started on your parliamentary and ministerial path. But was there something that you always wanted to achieve, or something that you wanted to, a place you wanted to go?
Laura, first I should, as Chancellor, welcome you all to the campus here at ANU on the lands of the Ngunnawal Ngambri people, and we're so delighted to be working with the New Zealand High Commission for this auspicious event this evening, so thank you all for being here. As to the question, I still ask myself, Julie, what are you going to be when you grow up? But I actually was born and raised on an apple and cherry orchard in the Adelaide Hills, a very small village called Basket Range, and apart from picking apples and cherries, there wasn't a great deal to do. And my father was an early adopter of technology, so we got one of the first black and white televisions in Basket Range. And I was smitten from the outset, so I wanted to be a mouseketeer. Because the Mickey Mouse Club was just the greatest show on television, and the star of the show was Annette Funicello. She was the centre of the whole Mickey Mouse Club. I wanted to be her. And that lasted, well, I still want to be in the Mickey Mouse Club, so that still lasts. But there is a theme here, there is a thread, Laura, because then I decided that I wanted to be an actor, having spent so many productive hours before the television set. I didn't care whether it was theatre or film, but I wanted to be an actor. And then at about age 14, I thought maybe a quiz show host, because that was on TV. And ultimately, thankfully, I landed on law. I wanted to be a lawyer. I suspect it was because I saw something on TV, which is a really shallow thing to say, but nobody in my family were in the legal profession, so I'm not sure where it came from. So I did study law and worked in a law firm in Adelaide, and this was at a time when more women were going into law, but very few were rising through the profession. There were no other women employed at the law firm. It had been around for about 100 years. There were no other females employed there except as the secretary or the cleaner. They didn't quite know what to do with me as the first woman that they'd ever employed in a legal capacity. But there was a mentor, and I should mention it now, Dame Roma Mitchell. She was a first. Now, we talk about trailblazers and pioneers. Dame Roma Mitchell was the first woman in Australia to be a judge, the first woman to be a QC, the first woman Chancellor, first woman State Governor. And I was privileged to grow up in the Adelaide legal profession when she was a Supreme Court judge. She was such an important, austere figure, yet she always went out of her way to talk to the young female lawyers. And I've never forgotten the example that she gave me. Now, I had a very successful career as a lawyer. It was wonderful as a corporate lawyer. And then I became the managing partner of the law firm, which seemed like a really good idea at the time, except there was a sudden realisation once I had my feet under the desk that I knew a lot about the law and being a lawyer, and I knew nothing about running a business. So I took a sabbatical, went off to Harvard Business School with the idea of coming back and running the law firm brilliantly, efficiently, just like they do in the textbooks at Harvard. But while I was there, I had an epiphany, a moment during a subject, government, business and the international economy, where suddenly I decided, I know what I want to do. I want to be part of the national debates on the national issues and contribute to the discourse on Australia's place in the world. I'm going to go into national parliament. We want to be very careful what you wish for, because within 2 years of returning from Harvard, I'd given up my legal career and I'd been elected as the member for Curtin in the House of Representatives. So then a 20-year political career, and now Chancellor of the Australian National University. Brian, my favourite job so far. Absolutely.
You talked about a light bulb moment, and I suppose that leads me to another thing about careers in general, but I think particularly for women doing things that aren't necessarily expected of them, and that's whether there's a particular moment where you think, I'm going to set the terms here for how I do this, or for how I'm judged. I mean, I've had a couple of them in my own career, because normally I've just sort of gone along, la, 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 la. And then somebody said something, I thought, no, actually, no, that's not going to happen. And smile my most smiling smile. You would have had a few of those dealing with your cabinet colleagues, I'm thinking, but...
How long have we got? Yes, I have had a few moments. I think one of the lessons I took from politics, and one that I pass on to whomever will listen, is to not let others define who you are and what you can achieve. There are so many people who are prepared to set for you a standard or a benchmark that they wouldn't or couldn't meet themselves. And I found that when I got to the point where I thought, no, I'll set my standards, I'll set my benchmarks of behaviour, and I'll work very hard to meet them and not try and please everybody else who have expectations of you that they don't have for themselves. I should have known that very early on in my political career, but it did take quite a few knocks to get to that point where I thought, I'm doing this for me and for my values and my judgment, and I have to live with myself. I don't have to live with what others are demanding of me. And once I got to that point in my political career, and it was when we were in opposition, between 2000, well, it was after a particularly fun time in opposition, it was about 2013 when we were just coming into government, I knew I was going to do it my way on my terms. And that has its downside, but for me, it was liberating.
It is liberating to sort of suddenly go, well, I don't actually have to meet all these other standards. And I mean, that's a lot of what you have talked about that just earlier, about it's not just necessarily about having to break through as a woman, but it's about being able to just say, I don't care if I'm not doing it the same way as everybody else.
What fascinates me, though, is that often in that moment, so often women are making a decision that they may not succeed as a consequence.
Yeah.
You are, and you're quite deliberately doing so. And I remember my light bulb moment. I had a couple of them, but one I remember really distinctly. I was in opposition as well. We'd been there for a few years, and there was a journalist who ran a scorecard in the national newspaper where he would rank out of 10, because, you know, it was his God-given right to do that, rank out of 10 how he thought members of Parliament had been doing their jobs. And I was an opposition MP, I held a couple of shadow portfolios, and he ranked me 5 out of 10. And he said in the description that I hadn't been performing well as an opposition MP because I had not claimed any scalps.
Well, you clearly had no future in politics.
Do you know, I think there's lots of professions where there is a preconceived idea of what success looks like for that role and how you're meant to behave for that role, whether it's law or whether it's in sport or whether it's in politics. And in politics, the view was to be a successful opposition member, you claim scalps. And I remember reading that and thinking, if that's the definition of success, I choose to fail, because I would rather be a decent human than a decent politician. And so I chose in that moment that, who knows, I may not go that far, but I'll be happy in myself that I've done it in a way that felt comfortable to me, and I will sleep blissfully at night. So it was a choice, but isn't it interesting that I thought it was a choice to fail?
Yeah, we overlook that there is, that you're looking down the chasm of potential disaster when you do things like that.
Or irrelevancy.
Yeah. Rena, acting is a precarious profession, you'd have to say. The work, you can't guarantee the work, you can't guarantee the sorts of roles that you get. How in that sort of world have you been able to try to set the terms of what you do so that you're doing things that are, you feel that you're being true to yourself in?
First, I have to own this as I'm Ngāti Hine. Hine means woman. I descend from a female. And when I'm often asked how I feel about this conversation about should women speak on a marae, my answer is always, I'm Ngāti Hine. That's all I say. I descend from a woman. Ngāti Hine, Hine Amaru, my grandmother, my mother. So I came from a long line of very strong women. So and I'm also one of 9 children. And something I've always owned and will own all my life is I grew up in the same house my brothers grew up in. I'm all about whānau, family. So in Māori we go, we're not the strength of one, but of many. So, and in that south comes the pressure because you've got that whole tribe. You got the whole whānau, you know, and I think for some of us, myself included, sometimes we have to leave home and go somewhere else where we can discover ourselves and be ourselves. I don't think that we have the greatest culture in New Zealand, and I think to a certain degree, all the Antipodes, the Commonwealth. Growing up, I was one of those kids that got bullied. I was brutally bullied as a kid because I was different. I was half caste for one. Well, that's what we were back then. I think the PC term now is biracial, I'm not sure. But we were probably one of the only families like that. So growing up, I had to ask myself, where do I belong? I was neither Māori and I was neither Pākehā. So I found myself in that position of being what I believe is a privileged position now, later in life, after I've made all my mistakes and had all my heartaches and effed up multiple times, whatever, of being the best of both and being a representative of both worlds. I am a product of my white mother and my brown father. And I think in the arts, I think that's the thing that drives us, is we're driven by humanity. You know, I can't, someone asked me if I'd ever go into politics. I said, no, I like my days off. It's the toughest arena, and I think any time any of us, which we've all had to do, when you put yourself out there, you have to be driven. There almost feels like there's a bit of predetermination and a predestiny in some ways. Is the only way I've been able to get up and do what I ended up doing, because it was against all the odds, and I was very one-track minded, very focused once I committed to being an actor, because I knew when I was walking down Camden Road in London that I could go back to medicine and have a guaranteed career and an income, and I knew that choosing the arts was picking up my cross, so to speak, and was going to be the harder thing to do. But you have to, like I said earlier, you have to follow your heart. That was the moment for me. I had to do it. And so I set out in that first 9 years pre-Once Were Warriors to be a good actor. And so I did theatre, television, and ultimately I wanted to do a leading role in a feature film. And that's how I got Beth. That's how I was blessed by that role, not because I just showed up. We've all been in the trenches, all of us in our careers. All that training, all that rehearsal to be a swimmer and to do what we do. It's not, you see the end result of probably 10, 20 years. So look at those people you admire and look at what got them to that position you want to be in. And so those are the moments that count. So I won't go into detail because it's too long. So I was driven, one-track minded. I didn't really I was so determined because I had left a small town, and my ticket out of my small, predominantly Māori town was called an education. I got school CNUE, and I was the only one to leave my hometown. And I'd gone off and become this nurse. I was the pride of my family. I was daddy's the pride of, the whole town. And then I went to London, and I did what young people do. And I'm going to say one thing, don't play with drugs, because you don't play. You play with fire, you get burned. But the good thing about it's true. Don't even think about it. It's an old-fashioned campaign, but just say no. And it works. So I achieved what I wanted to achieve in that first. When I got to the Cherry, I got to Beth Hecker in Once Were Warriors, and then as I was sharing with our wonderful Jacinda here, you get to the top. There's only one way down. It's down in a small country. There's, you get there. It's true. It's true. So you have to just remember to get to a mountaintop, there's a valley. And this is the journey of life, and there's no shortcuts. And you're going to have those moments every time when you have to make up your mind, do you want to go at this again? Or do I just want to go and be a teacher? Or do you want to go at this? And those moments, I think, happen. Or you have to do it on at least every every year, once a year, do I still want to be an actor? Well, I'm still doing it. Do I still want to be an actor? Ask me next year. So it's the perseverance and it's the courage to follow your convictions despite the naysayers, despite the hate you will incur. Look, you're going to put yourself out there, you're going to be in a fire and you're going to get burned. And it takes an enormous amount of courage and extraordinary convictions just to get to this position.
So, which is a great point to ask you, Bronte. I mean, you know, it's one thing to sort of go from being the 7-year-old to the kid who gets to go to the Olympics, but to keep going as you get older involves a whole range of choices. Now, you've decided to have another go at the Olympics next year, which is completely awesome. But I mean, it's a risky path in a whole range of ways, I presume. Financially, emotionally, you have to put a lot of things on your life on hold. And how do you think about those things?
Yeah, it seemed so simple when I was 7, right? It's like, I'll just train hard and I'll just go to an Olympics. And my goal was always just to show up at an Olympics. I was like, I just want to go there and race. That's it. That's what I saw. That was the thing. Put on a green and gold jumper. That was it. And then I got to my first Olympics and I was looking around and I suddenly realized that I didn't know how to be an Olympian. Like, I was looking around and I was on a team with Liesl Jones, and this was her 4th Olympics. By the way, that lovely stat you said before, that there's been 3 Australian swimmers who have gone to 4 Olympics. All of them are women. So that's a testament to how strong the females in my sport are. But I walked around and I was like, I don't know how to be here. I don't know how to wave to a TV camera. I don't know how to be the person that I saw on TV. Those seemed like superhuman. Susie O'Neill was a superhuman to me. Now someone's going to be watching me. I don't know how to be that person. And I spoke to Liesl about it, and she was like, you don't have to be that person. All you need to do is swim from this end of the pool to that end of the pool as fast as you possibly can. That is it. That's all you've got to do. And just do it your way, because that is the thing that you've been training to do, and that's the thing that, that's it. Just make it as simple as possible. So that was brilliant advice, firstly, to make it as simple as possible. And I finished 9th at that first Olympics in the 50 freestyle and did a good race, and I was happy with it. And I took a lot of learnings from that forward. But as you were saying, Rena, like that to me was sort of the top. I'd got to the Olympics and I was like, this is it. This is what I was dreaming of. And then you realize that there's false peaks everywhere. And that's not the top. There's another top around the corner, or there's another valley around the corner. And it was the drive to see what could possibly happen if I kept pushing that kept me coming back to the sport. At that point, I was only 18. I was fresh out of school. I was doing my business degree, put that on a part-time basis. Yeah, it took me 8 years, by the way, so if anyone's taking a long time to do their degree, don't worry. That's a 3-year degree, by the way. It took me 8 years. But I'm finished now. And yes, it's a very insecure place to be, because every single year, we're not on contracts. Every single year, you turn up at the trials, and you've got to come 1st or 2nd in the country, top 8 time in the world, and then you get to go to the major meet, which is the World Championships, Commonwealth Games, or Olympic Games. And if you do not perform on that day, then all your training for that year is over. You do not receive funding. You will not receive training support. And you will not get to fulfill your dream that year. And that is the reality every single time. But it's never, ever occurred to me to go for something more secure. Yes, I've got other things outside the sport, and I believe in being a well-rounded human and having balance and all of those things. But there is something so special about standing behind the block, standing in a place where great failure and great success are possible, and you get to stand there just before, and it could be both. And you stand there and both success and failure are equally possible. And there's so few arenas where you get to step up and do that. And to get to step into that space over and over and over again and know that it's just down to you in that moment. You've got an amazing team, you've done all this training, and you walk out behind the blocks and the whistle goes and it goes quiet. And you can just hear your heart going and your breathing going. You just take one deep breath, and you've got 1 minute. And that's it. And that's going to decide your fate. And I can't think of anything more exciting. What you guys
This sounds
do...
awful. Like, just awful.
I am dying. I can't. This is so terrible.
You're all thinking it.
What each one of you do absolutely terrifies me. There's no way I could be on a stage. There's no way I could be in politics. That is the most terrifying thing I could think of. But getting to stand up and just see what you're capable of, it's exhilarating. And I'm obviously still chasing it because I've somehow decided to come back for more.
That's what I just wanted to quickly say, is that moment she's talking about. We've all been there. We've all chased that moment. What got me to Beth Heke and Warriors, and the key to it was I was fearless. But once I was outed, oh my God, that's another story. Fearless. Yep. Fearless. That's what that moment is called. Is fearlessness, and you can't accommodate fear. Fear will stop you. Fear will stifle you. It's fearless, and we do get a bit addicted to chasing that moment.
While we're all being sort of terrified and we've stopped breathing, this is one of the things that I'm really intrigued about with you. I mean, that absolute individual focus of having to do that, and your life is in your hands for 60 seconds or whatever, on the one hand. But then at 22, as I said in the introductory remarks, you end up, being the president of the Australian Swimmers Association, which at that time was basically falling to pieces. You're having to think and lead, and lead not in the sense of necessarily being out front, but that's part of it, but also creating a sense of, team of support.
And in my sport, which is an individual sport, in order to be successful, you focus on what you have to do to get yourself to the end. And it is all about you, and it's very selfish and it's very individualistic. Stepping outside of that, when I became president of the Australian Swimmers Association and also a leader on the team looking after culture on the Dolphins team, that was not something that my coach or the people around me at the time thought was a very good idea, because it would distract from my one core focus. And it wasn't until I did some work with the commandos in Special Forces who work in teams of 6, and they talk about the neurochemistry of teaming and how being part and feeling part of a team and having belonging increases your performance. Your physical output will change based on your endocrine profile. Your cortisol levels will decrease if you feel like you belong somewhere. And I became very passionate about that, and how could I bring that into this cohort of swimmers where we're greater than the sum of our parts, and as you're saying, it's not I, it's we. And I found so much more strength in that than I thought that I ever would. So this thing that was supposed to be almost a burden or almost something that was going to distract from my success actually added to my success. And it's, like I said, I'm obviously chasing that moment behind the block, but I'm also there because of the people around me and because of the amazing team that we now have, and because I yearn to be part of that cohort of people. And I wouldn't have done that if I just stayed in my one lane, just trying to make myself better. By trying to make the team better, by trying to make others better, I found so much more purpose beyond just swimming up and down a black line, which, by the way, is not that riveting. I do 19,000 swim strokes a week, so it's fairly repetitive. So anything new is brilliant, and it really brought home to me that it's individual success and group success. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can actually do both and have both, and they feed off each other. And now that's what I'll take forward into whatever I end up doing when I stop doing those swim strokes.
So that sort of immediately makes me think of cabinet government, and whether you've been neurally rewired to both our former politicians. How important and how helpful was being part of a team? Did you actually feel like you were part of a team, or were you all individuals? Julie Bishop's pulling a bit of a face, so I'm going to ask her first and then ask Dame Jacinda.
Politics is very adversarial. At every step of the way you are competing. In order to be pre-selected, you're competing against others within your own party who also want that role. You compete at every election, and I was involved in 7 general elections, so you're competing against the other candidates from other parties or independents. Within your own party, you're competing for positions, for appointments, for advancement, for promotion. You're constantly up against the opposition, whether it's the government of the day or you're in opposition, and you're constantly watching your back because, as the old saying goes, it's the government on that side and the opposition behind you, wherever you are. And there are so many people who want your job. Both from the other side, but also within your own party. So you do have to build up a significant amount of resilience to be constantly, always competing in an adversarial environment. I love the fact that Jacinda said she knew that adopting a particular style could set her up for failure, because I get that. And there were so many times when I thought, this is just too hard. I'm a lover, not a fighter. So what the hell did I do going into politics in the first place? But I knew that there was always a cause that I was passionate about. There was always something beyond the day-to-day competition and adversarial nature of politics. And what kept me in it for over 20 years, and with the highs and the highs are incredible and the lows are devastating, and it's all played out in front of the Australian public. What kept me going is that I really believed that I had a contribution to make. I really believed that I could be part of better debates and better discourse and better dialogue and aim for better outcomes. Not everybody is in politics for that reason. But enough people are to make you believe in the process. Enough on all sides are in it to give you faith and hope. And I had plenty of it. I mean, there were times when I would get home and think, I am never getting out from under this doona again. That's it. I've had it. I'm not going back. But you know, the next morning, you really believe that you've got something to contribute, and it gets you out and it gets you back, and you're passionate about what you can achieve, and it keeps you going. As far as teamwork is concerned, when a team is working well together, they're invincible and they're in government. When a team falls apart, they lose government and they're in opposition. It's as simple as that. It's teamwork that wins government, and it's the individual infighting that loses you government. And I don't know if anybody's listening, but that's the key.
Yeah, I can't disagree with what you said, Julie. I've always thought, certainly I know from the outside, it looks like politics is a blood sport, but it doesn't have to be that way. I spent 9 years in opposition when I first came in, and those were hard 9 years, because no one fights tooth and nail to get into politics and then into Parliament in order to sit on the crossbenches and oppose everything. You go there because you want to make a positive difference, and it can wear you down and it can wear your team down. But when we made it into government, and I found myself somewhat surprisingly in the role of camp leader, or Prime Minister, as it were, I was really determined that we were going to be a team. And there is something about being in politics, you're right, it can be extraordinarily competitive. There's not many careers that when you enter in at the junior level of backbench MP, everyone asks you, when are you going to be Prime Minister? But everyone assumes if you want to be a politician, of course you want the top job. It's not the case. If you enter into a company, no one says to you, when are you going to be the CEO? But there's always an assumption of individual aspiration, and that you personally have your own ambition to be the kingpin.
And that you'll be prepared to take anybody down.
Absolutely.
So that you get that role.
And yet that's not the case. Many people are there quite happily as members of a team, willing for the rest of their team to succeed. And that's certainly how I saw myself. So when I was lucky enough to be in the role of Prime Minister and the leader of the New Zealand Labour Party, I was determined that we would be a strong team. And to be honest, when I left, one of the saddest things for me was leaving that team behind. They were my family. And I loved them. And I hope that, amongst the many things I'm proud of, I hope that legacy of just trying to create a supportive environment where we looked after one another and after one another's mental health in an incredibly tough environment, I hope that's something that lasts.
Unfortunately, I've got to be the bossy person to say that I've got this run sheet which says that we're more or less out of time, but a couple of you have spoken about who your mentors were, but I didn't actually get round to asking you, Jacinda, who your mentor was.
Do you know, we've had this discussion tonight about what it means to be mana wāhine. And you've heard a definition of it, but I want to speak a little bit to the living embodiment of a mana wāhine, and that person is Dame Annette King. Some of you may not know, Dame Annette will be finishing her role as High Commissioner here in Canberra at the end of this year, and I'm going to ask her to come and join me on the stage for a moment where I briefly reflect on her time. Dame Annette doesn't know about this. I am going to be crucified after this event. I strongly believe that those of us who have the privilege of being a first or being able to move into roles of leadership never ever walk a path that hasn't had a foundation laid by someone else. And a foundation was laid for me by Dame Annette. I feel very privileged to call this woman both a friend and a mentor. She taught me while I was in Parliament how to wear my heart on my sleeve. She taught me how to be staunch and not to take any rubbish. I sanitised the word for this event. She taught me how to always listen to my moral compass, and she taught me that always the most important thing in my life will be my family. Every other day, she didn't just ask me what policy work I was doing, but which men I was dating. She was our longest-serving female politician in New Zealand's history. But much more important than her longevity was the fact that she carried through that career her integrity the entire time. It made good sense to me that after she made the decision to retire from politics, that we would put her in the most important job in terms of New Zealand's relationships internationally, and for her to come here, and we were so lucky you did. Dame Annette has been extraordinary for New Zealand. I credit her for the work of bringing back New Zealand's citizenship rights here in Australia. Thank you to the government. Annette, you have given New Zealand the best years of your life, and in return, I give you our heartfelt thanks and gratitude. You're an incredible woman. I love you dearly. Thank you.
that concludes the evening, except politics and stage shows being what they are.
I just really have to say one thing. I would be really remiss if I didn't go Matildas!
Where to leave it except for to say to our panel, thank you for an outstanding evening. Annette, I want to give the last word to you. You've been an outstanding partner here. We're going to, of course, miss you as you finish up. And personally, you have done many things out in front, but also behind the scenes to make things right. An outstanding partner for the Australian National University, emblematic of the Australia-New Zealand relationship. May it continue as it has been for the last, hundreds of years into the future. It's a tremendous privilege today to have the panel and be able to celebrate Annette. Let's thank them all one more time. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for saving it.